Good morning, everybody. So nice to see you on this bright, sunny day for a wonderful focus program speaker.
We don't really hear you.
Okay, is that better?
Yes.
Yes, all righty. I will keep it close. We're just so happy today to have Tina Ramirez, president and founder of Hardwired Global. And if you read some of the notices, you know a little bit, but it's a nonprofit corporation founded over 10 years ago. They specialize in religious freedom education and training to produce or to promote peace, respect, and understanding worldwide. Boy, can we use that today. Her work experience, she has worked in education for years and years. Her educational programs with respect to Hardwired have wonderful programs that have some wonderful testimonials from the people and leaders of countries, a lot of them in the Mideast. She has testified before Congress. She previously served as a policy advisor to the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom and as a foreign policy advisor to the U.S. Congress. She is the author of a book called Iraq, Hope in the Midst of Darkness. And as far as education, she's received an MA in International Human Rights from the University of Essex in the United Kingdom. I would like to read a little quote from a gentleman from Lebanon who experienced her programming. This is a principal of a public school in Lebanon. And he said, throughout our 20 years of experience in education, we have never had such a diverse blend of participants in one room where people from the most prestigious private schools to middle class schools to poor schools are working together towards our one goal. The training was a way of bridging lots of different gaps, not only religious ones, but socioeconomical and geographical ones too. And with that, I will turn it over to Tina to tell you more about Hardwired Global. Thank you, Tina.
Thank you, Barbara. I am going to go ahead and start with a video because I thought that will make everything that I say make much more sense. So Keaton, can we go ahead and start the video, please? Thank you. When I tell people that we're working in Iraq, often they think of the conflict and the violence and the horrors that we've all seen in the news. This is a country that for generations has had a really rich history of religious pluralism and diversity. It was the cradle of civilization. And unfortunately, when ISIS came in 2014, it completely destroyed that hope for so many. The Yazidi community was decimated. The Christian community was given 48 hours to completely leave their ancient homeland overnight. And so entire communities that had survived for generations were now being forced out of Iraq. So hardwired is the idea that really we're all hardwired to be free. And that our most fundamental freedom is our freedom of conscience. Our ability to live out the dictates of our own conscience and to live in accordance with our values. That's what we're all about. Pluralism, for us, is where communities can actively engage one another across their deepest differences, where they don't have to look and sound the same, where they can have differences and yet still be united and be peaceful and coexist. We started working with teachers from many different religious communities who had fled and who would one day return. And those teachers are an inspiration to us every day because when ISIS was defeated, the hate remained and their schools were violent and it wasn't safe for them, but they were able to go back in and start that process of rebuilding. We began training teachers in our pedagogy and in our teacher training program to understand pluralism, to understand the freedom of religion or belief for all people, to understand human dignity, and to understand, most importantly, how to help children that had been taught to hate, how to overcome those feelings and replace them with feelings of respect and love and a deep sense of dignity and freedom for one another. Hardwired's program was built around a simulation using fruit, and it's called Fruitopia. When we give fruit to a child, they're able to see that on the outside this fruit might look different, but on the inside, the apples and the oranges and the pineapples, they all have seeds. They're all the same on the inside. And so after going through this simulation, they're able to really look at it in the context of what it means to be a human being. That on the outside we have different beliefs, we have different cultures, different ways of expressing ourselves and our beliefs, but on the inside, we're human beings. We have a heart, we have emotions, we have a brain, we have a conscience, and we need to live according to those things inside of us that make us who we are. What's so amazing about the work that we've been doing in Iraq is that these children have never seen a model of pluralism. They've never seen an example of religious freedom. For so much of their lives, for generations, they've seen people killing each other and being violent over their differences. And so this is the first time where we see communities say that they have hope for their future and that there's a way forward. In countries like Lebanon and Kosovo, the government has invited us to train all of their teachers. They want to replicate what's happened in Iraq in their communities. We're so excited about the seeds of peace and freedom and dignity that are being planted in Iraq and how it's bearing fruit, not just there, but around the world. I am going to try to talk loudly, so if I'm not loud enough, please let me know. I know that you're all here today because, like me, you want to leave the world a better place, and you're probably hoping that I can give you some inspiration into how to do that. The work that we've been able to do in Iraq in the last 10 years has just been unbelievable. But I know that the work doesn't stop there. You want to know how we can relate it to what we're dealing with here in America and in our communities around us. So I'm going to bring it full circle by the end, I promise. 11 years ago, I started Hardwired, and it is not a tech company. It might sound like one, but that will help you remember it. It is a religious freedom organization. We help promote people's freedom of conscience all around the world. And we really believe that freedom of conscience is essential for any free society. And unfortunately, in the world today, many people are not free. I think you could just take a quick glance around the globe from North Korea to Cuba to China to Russia, I mean, you name it. And the freedom of people to think on their own freely, to believe on their own freely, to express themselves freely is probably the freedom that's most under attack in the world today. It's actually over 80% of the world's population that just doesn't even have the freedom that we have today to just talk about these kinds of things. But here in America, we have challenges too. Some of you may feel like your ability to speak freely, believe freely has been challenged, maybe at Thanksgiving, maybe at the dinner table, maybe with family and friends. I'm not sure. I know Barbara. I've known her for many years now, and I know that she's a huge advocate of freedom and has been trying to open that forum both here and within her community for many years, and I appreciate that. But I know that this is a challenge here in our country and in our community. I am from Richmond. I don't live here right now, though. I actually moved to Oregon a couple of months ago, so but my company is still here and my family is still here, and so I'll be back frequently. But I want to share with you what Hardwired is doing around the world and how it started. So when I was a child, my father and mother got divorced, as unfortunately some do, and my dad converted to a different religion. And at about 10 or 11 years old, I ended up getting in really intense theological debates with him, which maybe is not normal for an 11-year-old, but for me that was. And we had completely different ideas about the world and about our future, in our faith. And after about 10 years, a good 10 years, unfortunately, we came to the resolution that we were going to agree to disagree. And I had never understood how deeply that had really changed my perspective on life and who I am as a human being, really until I had started Hardwired and was thinking about that question. But the debates that my dad and I went through in that process of challenging one another and disagreeing with one another and learning how to do it by still loving one another was really instrumental in my life in teaching me how to live and interact and respect and value and empathize with people that believed very differently from me, not just religiously, but politically and in every other way, and to treat them with respect and dignity. And I think we all know that that's something that we've lost in our society, that civility, that ability to agree to disagree, and to love people who have very deep differences from us. And it's a challenge. And so what we've done in Iraq, and I want to share a little bit about, is really, in my opinion, a great example of if you can do this and bring people together to respect one another, where they just killed each other in one of the most egregious genocides in world history, then I think we can, it gives us a model for what we can do here to get other generations, younger generations, to maybe have a little bit more respect and understanding and empathy when they're engaging with people who believe differently from them, and ultimately to respect the freedom of conscience that we all have. So, as I mentioned, around the world, this freedom of religion is really under attack, and it's a foreign concept. It's just not ingrained in their culture and their civilizations like it was here in America in our founding. So about 10 years ago, as you saw in the video, I was actually about 5 months pregnant with my daughter, and a genocide began in Iraq. You saw it on the news, so you know what happened, and you saw it in the video. But the cradle of civilization, where ancient civilizations met and emerged, was essentially experiencing a genocide. And ISIS came in, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, and they said, if you don't look like us and sound like us and believe like us, we're going to kill you. And so Yazidis were literally given no time. They just attacked them because they thought they were devil worshippers. And we have about 50 mass graves with the bodies of young Yazidi men that they slaughtered immediately. And then there were around 7,000 young girls that were held as sex slaves, and then there were about over 1,000 young children that were held as cubs of the caliphate and that were brainwashed to believe this hateful ideology of how to kill other people that didn't believe like ISIS. And then they implemented a new curriculum in the entire area of Mosul, of northern Iraq, where they taught children using new textbooks, 1 bomb plus 1 bomb equals 2 bombs, and how to kill people that essentially believe differently. And the Christians were given only 48 hours notice to leave, and they had all the jewelry ripped off of them as they were forced out. And I met elderly families who literally had to crawl out, and I saw their knees bruised, and it was horrific to see what had occurred there. And after that, in that aftermath, when I was there, pregnant with my daughter, and thinking, what in the world, in our generation, our lifetime, to see that kind of inhumanity and what could be done, we decided to go in and to start training leaders there in religious freedom and how to respect the freedom of one another to believe differently and not be killed simply because of what you believe. Obviously, we couldn't do it in the areas that ISIS controlled, but when we started in 2014, by 2017, we had a cadre of teachers that by the time ISIS the area of Mosul had been liberated from ISIS, they were then equipped to go back into Mosul. And so that's what you saw in the video. So starting in 2017 to today, we've trained over 40 schools across Mosul. They're model schools for religious freedom and pluralism. And we have over 1,000 teachers across Mosul. We've trained the entire Directorate of Education, so their official government education department in Mosul. So they're integrating these lessons in this training program into their entire teacher training and curriculum across all of Mosul. So Mosul, which in 2014, I had seen one of the worst genocides in our lifetime, and in my lifetime at least, and this inhumanity spread like a cancer, these ideas of hate and intolerance, where future generations of children, if left to themselves, would have simply repeated the same cycle of violence. We were able to stop that and reverse it. And we didn't just reverse it in Mosul. What we did in Mosul was so inspiring to the government and to other people, and now every city across Iraq has been asking us for it, and the government of Kurdistan, in the Kurdistan region of Iraq, has invited us. And so now this year, we've trained over another 800 teachers in all of Kurdistan to embrace these values of religious freedom and pluralism and to begin teaching them in the classroom. That's in Iraq, in a place that hit rock bottom, that we've been seeing on the news, that's cost us trillions of dollars and many American lives that have invested in it. And now it's on this trajectory, not perfect, but there are these seeds that have been planted there that are beginning to change their future and transform their culture. And there are people there that never had hope that now have hope. And I think that's pretty inspiring. And it's pretty amazing. But we didn't just stop there. As you saw in the video, other countries have been asking for this program, and we're working in Kosovo and Lebanon, which has been affected by the situation in Israel and Palestine. We've been working in many other countries, so it's not just there. A couple of years ago, we had an enormous influx of refugees from Afghanistan here. And those refugees came in from a country that didn't know religious freedom. And so these children from Afghanistan, many of them had suffered and experienced the violence of some of this hateful ideology, similar to ISIS, that the Taliban had been promoting across Afghanistan. They had never seen an example of religious freedom or pluralism. They didn't know what it was. So they came here to America. They get thrown into these schools, and they really didn't know how to make sense of our country, our values, of anything. And then you had American students that thought that all of these new refugees were probably just like the Taliban over there and were afraid of them. So you had a lot of confusion. So in that environment, we worked with all of the refugee agencies that are operating here in Virginia, and we launched a training program in schools with the refugee students and the American students to bring them together. And in American schools, where they might memorize the Constitution and might be able to tell you what the First Amendment is, but really don't know anything about it in practice. And if you have any question about that, just ask anyone under the age of 18 what the First Amendment is and what that means, and to give you an example, and you'll know what I mean. But within that context, these high school students were able to learn and really understand somebody that had suffered not having their freedom, that they really didn't think about or understand before. And these Afghan students were able to, for the first time, realize that no one gives you your rights. You're not waiting for somebody to tell you what you can and can't do. You simply have them because of your humanity and your dignity and your value and worth as a human being. And in America, as we know, it's the government that doesn't give you your rights, but they recognize and respect those rights that are inherent within you. And so it was a great learning opportunity for these American students and refugee students, and a great conversation around one of our most fundamental freedoms that we were able to have within schools here, right here in Virginia. We have then taken that, and right now we're working with the YMCAs of the greater Richmond area, so that all of their teen directors have been trained in this program, and now they're sharing it with youth across this entire region. And this is important because, as I shared at the beginning, young people are having a really tough time understanding how to agree to disagree, how to be civil, how to not shut down other people when they have different ideas or beliefs, but to understand that that freedom of conscience that's within us is how we're hardwired, and it's sacred, and it can't be denied or attacked or taken away. It's what makes us human, and valuing that in a society is what makes our society safe and free, and the place that everybody in the world wants to come to. And so those conversations that we're beginning to have, and the model that we have in Iraq, have been really important to help open up a new wave of understanding freedom here, not just in Virginia, but hopefully across the entire country, so that youth and younger generations can begin to understand this freedom that so many of our family members, of our grandparents, of our great-grandparents, of our founding fathers, you name it, have fought, bled, and died for, and sacrificed for us to have. Because sadly, as you know, if we don't pass these values on to the next generation, they just won't be there. And as we've seen in Iraq, they didn't grow up in a culture that understood these values. And so we have to plant those seeds there. But how sad when we have those seeds planted in our own country to lose them. And so that's why the work of Hardwired is so important, and that's why we work in so many countries around the world, but also here in America, to try to plant those seeds of peace and freedom and of understanding what our most fundamental rights are, how we're hardwired, and how to value and live out those rights and freedoms. So from all the way over in Iraq to here in America, we believe that every person truly is hardwired to be free, and we want to make that possible, and that's the work that we're investing in. Now, I shared a little bit about the program, and let me just say that we've left some books in the back, so when you leave, and I'll answer questions in a moment, but those books in the back are children's books that the teachers that we've trained in all these other countries have actually, they inspired. So they wrote a lesson. Fruitopia is something that I wrote and created. That's the main core of our program. But there's the Peaceful Garden that was a lesson written by some teachers in Iraq. And there are many other lessons, and we turn them into stories, and then we put the lesson at the back so that teachers everywhere could use them, and that you could use them to share with your children, your grandchildren, to leave in your library. But a really great way of spreading these ideas and these seeds of freedom is to share those books. And so we have them in the back if you would like a copy, and Keaton here can help you figure that out at the end. But I will stop here so that I can answer questions, and thank you again for your time.
Okay, we're open for questions, and I'm going to, since we have only one mic, you can ask your question, and then I'll ask Tina to repeat the question before she responds. Any questions? Question? I have a question then.
There's a question over here too.
Oh, okay. All right.
You said there's a new way to answer these questions. You developed a new way to answer these questions. So the question is every person hardwired to be free? Is that a yes or a no?
Yeah, no, that's what we believe. We believe everybody is hardwired to be free.
Okay.
But unfortunately, what we're seeing in society around the world is it's the one freedom people want to stifle and squash, because when people have their own mind and their own conscience and can speak freely and act freely, then they're not always falling in line with what a dictator or with what a government wants. And so in North Korea, in China, in Russia, you have a lot of dictatorial governments that want to squash that inherent freedom because it prevents them from full control over their population. Here in America, what we're seeing is the squashing of your voice, of your ability to dissent through social media, through regular media, you name it. And it's a social phenomenon that if people don't like what you're saying, then they try to silence it, and that's just as destructive. And it's maybe not getting to the dictatorial level, but it's a slippery slope, and it's not a healthy one for any free society.
Okay, so the new way of asking the question and answering it has not really changed.
I don't know how you're. No. I mean, it's just simply bringing it about, but I don't know what you're referring to, so I may have just misspoke or might have been unclear. Yeah.
Well, that's a non-answer.
Anyone else? I'd appreciate asking a question if you would repeat it for our audience on live stream. Wow, and how do you develop funding for a nonprofit organization such as yours?
So the question was where we get our funding for a nonprofit such as ours. So we receive funding primarily from grants. A number of different foundations, foreign governments actually invest in the work, and then also from individuals. So individuals can make donations. Some of the foundations that we have that support us are the John Templeton Foundation, which supported that video that you saw, the Sterling Foundation, which owns a major company called doTERRA that does essential oils, the Frank Batten Jr. Foundation, who has been a very big sponsor of most of the stuff out in Norfolk, Virginia, and others, and then individuals. And they're across the country, and they're in other countries. The British government has been a very big sponsor of a lot of the work we've done in Iraq because of their long history there and interest in, ensuring greater freedom. So,
Have you ever worked with the Richmond Peace Center?
so the question was, have we ever worked with the Richmond Peace Center? I believe we've been in touch a few years ago when we were doing some of the refugee outreach, but we've never worked with them.
How do you get, or do you need government support when you're doing overseas mission work? For example, somebody in Iraq had to be tolerated, or ISIS might have just taken you out. How'd you get the protection?
So the question is how we do this work in dangerous countries and work with the foreign governments. How do we get their support? So when we first started, a lot of the work was legal trainings, and we didn't work with the foreign governments simply because they're not really interested in us helping them change the laws. When we began doing more educational work, and as we were working in Iraq with lawyers and other people on legal issues, the government actually approached us, or government officials approached us and said, we have a problem with education and we would like your help. And so we did a pilot, and we did it with teachers from different countries that were not connected to their Ministry of Education. But what we realized quickly after that pilot was that they weren't really able to implement anything very well within the schools without government permission and support. And so since 2017 essentially, we started working with governments to get agreements to be able to work with teachers so the teachers could actually implement this in the schools. And so in Lebanon, Kosovo, Iraq, we have agreements with the government ministries of education, and we work through them so the teachers have the full support. And then in 2020, actually 1 week before the world was shut down and you couldn't travel because of COVID, we were in Morocco, and the King of Morocco's senior advisor, Andre Azoulay, a prominent Jewish leader in the Middle East, hosted for us a gathering of these Ministry of Education leaders from all over the world. And so we had over 20 different countries represented in Morocco, and we met with them and shared what was happening, and that's what led other countries to invite us to work there as well. In Iraq, the government, and I think with all the leaders that we were with in Morocco, when they began to see the impact that we were having, they wanted it because they haven't been able to have any other solutions. And so probably getting back to your question about what the kind of questions we're asking, the model that we're using is very different. We are not using a direct, we're going in there to tell you what religious freedom is. We're going in there so that you can discover what it is and why it's valuable and why you're hardwired to have it and why you should want to protect it, not just for yourself, but for everyone. And it's a very different approach than has been taken in the world of this issue. And it's been a much more effective approach in actually creating institutional change within those countries. I'm not trying to change the countries or what they believe. I'm simply trying to make them more free and more open to this freedom for all people. The biggest thing that we've seen that the countries are excited about is that it's helped children become resilient against extremism. And it's helped children that were radicalized overcome it and reverse that trend and learn a different way. And so whether it's in Kosovo or Lebanon or Iraq, the governments are very interested in stopping extremism and preventing the overthrow of their countries. And so they're very interested in our program for that reason, and it's having these other great effects. Yes.
How do you overcome the language barriers that you're bound to encounter?
So language is a barrier, of course, but the fact that I'm this 5-foot little white American girl is also another barrier. But it's actually a really important aspect of what I think influences them is that they don't expect me to be able to come in and teach them anything. And then when we do these trainings, they're really challenged because we don't tell people what to think. That's not our approach. Our approach is to teach them how to think for themselves and how to think critically so that they're able to challenge some of the bad ideas in their society themselves and that it comes from within them, not from me. Because it's not sustainable if it's always just me. So when we go in there, we use translators, and it can sometimes be challenging because I'm always listening to what they're saying, and so that I understand how to lead them to a deeper discussion or a deeper understanding. And so language is very important, but we use translators. We've been working there now for over 10 years, and so the translators and the people we work with have been with us for a long time. And now we have an entire cadre of teachers in each of these countries and local staff that run everything. So my work is very much removed at this point because it's been so many generations of teachers and people that they've trained. So we use a trainer model, and that allows us to replicate it and make it sustainable within the country with local people that have the local language and that can understand the local concepts of religious freedom that need to be conveyed. Barbara?
Well, have Christians been able to come back to Mosul and Iraq?
So the question is, have the Christians been able to come back to Mosul? So when ISIS came in, they lost another half of their population of Christians in Iraq, and most have remained outside of the country. The ones that are there have rebuilt their communities, their churches. We're actually working specifically right now in Assyrian schools. So those are Assyrian Christians, in order to help them specifically be able to maintain their freedom and their understanding of their rights within the country. But it's been very challenging for Christians in Iraq, and many of them might never go back, as much as the community there wants to try to encourage it. So in the next couple of months, there are like 4 or 5 ancient churches that are in the old town of Mosul that were bombed because ISIS used them to hold court to sentence anybody that for a crime. And so all of the chopping of the hands and beheadings and everything that happened were happening in these ancient Christian churches from all the way back to the 1400s and even earlier, from the 800s, and old churches. And when the U.S. helped liberate the area, those churches were bombed because that's where ISIS was holding their command center. And so they were destroyed, but UNESCO has been involved in rebuilding them. The Pope was there a couple of years ago now, or a year and a half ago. And so you'll see them if you look at any of the images from when the Pope visited Mosul, which was really historic. And they are now restored, and that grand opening should happen within the next couple of months. And we'll be there when that happens, and we're going to be doing programs with the children, the Christian children that are there, and the other children, and working with Father Emmanuel, who is a bishop in the area. He was the last bishop to leave and the first to return to Mosul. And his hope is that the Christians would return. And the head Muslim leader of UNESCO that was engaged in the rebuilding of Mosul had told us that he doesn't feel like it doesn't feel like it's home without the churches being rebuilt and the sound of the bells. And so all of these Muslims were there helping rebuild the churches because they wanted to hear the sound of bells. They wanted the Christians to return. So there's a lot of great things happening there that you probably don't see in the news. The public broadcasting station, PBS, had a documentary series that was done on Hardwired's work in Iraq. And we can send the links to you for that, Barbara, so you can share them with everyone. But there were 2 episodes that were released this year about our work in Iraq, and then another one will be released later this year that showed the churches that are being rebuilt and the work that's taking place there. And it talks a lot about the Christian community and the Yazidis and the other communities and how they're rebuilding since ISIS was defeated. So, yes.
So, doing what you're doing has to take an enormous amount of personal courage. And, I really bow to you in that. So, but I have a personal question for you, and that is, what shaped you? What in your past, besides these conversations with your father, shaped you and enabled you to take on something so huge?
Thank you. The people that I get to work with in these countries, they're the ones that are living on the front lines of the conflict every day. These teachers that we trained in safety, who then went back into Mosul at risk of their own lives. I mean, to me, those are the real heroes out there. And I'm inspired by them every day to do it. And so knowing the importance of this freedom in my life and of our country and our history, and knowing how important it is in the world for people that aren't free to be free, is what inspires me. And I guess we're all made differently. We're all hardwired for something different, and that's just what I'm hardwired for. But I really am truly inspired every day by the people I get to work with and seeing the impact that they're having and the real change that's occurring in countries that there just wasn't hope in. And so seeing a lot of it may not make sense here, but in the Middle East, when you see men in their 60s and 70s that are in our program that are crying and that are changed and having these new conversations with their children and grandchildren and teaching, it doesn't normally happen over there, and so that something big has happened when that's happened in the society, because they've really taken to heart, this is something different, we need to do it, and it's making a difference. And they're just so thankful that they finally found an example of how to change it so that their kids don't have to grow up suffering like they did and seeing the horrors that they saw. So, there was a follow-up, and then I'll come here. Yes.
So how could this work be taken to Israel and Palestine? Has anything been done around that?
So I can have that conversation with you offline, but because this is recorded, I can't have it online.
I got it.
But yes, thank you. And if afterwards we close it off, then I can answer it. Yes, ma'am.
Would you explain to us, you seem to deal mostly with teachers who teach children, but are they teaching adults and parents, grandparents, so on?
So when you watch the PBS documentaries, if you get a chance to watch them, the question was, how do we work with parents and leaders and others, not just children and teachers? What you'll see is that the children really lead that transformation in the community. So just as an example, when we went into Mosul, the teachers go through this entire training program, and then they share this Fruitopia lesson with the children. And then the children don't just do the lesson, they do a second activity, and then they do a play that they performed, and you saw it in the video. And so it's a year-long process of different lessons they go through where they really begin to internalize these concepts of religious freedom and pluralism. And through that process, we've had, we went and we observed the plays in the 40 different schools across Mosul, and we were able to talk with parents and community leaders, and at these big celebrations we did with the play, and we were fascinated that members of ISIS that we didn't think were supporting us, that we thought were very much against our program in the beginning, when we held these plays and the community events where they're talking about the importance of religious freedom, and it's in the video, and it's shocking, and the whole community was celebrating what they learned. And then one parent told me that her sister lost her arm in the conflict and her brother lost his legs. They were members of ISIS, and she didn't want her daughter to participate in the play. And we said, well, why was it that you decided to let her participate? And she said, because in the play, my daughter was going to be the little banana. And when the conflict happened, no one came to help my sister or my brother. But in the play, the little banana was hurt and got bruised, and someone came to help her. And it opened up her heart to this idea that just because someone is different, a banana, an orange, an apple, doesn't mean you have to be afraid of them. But she was, as somebody that supported ISIS, I'm sure. And so we see parents being changed, we see community leaders being changed, we see government officials being changed, and that's the power of what is happening. It's not just a lesson that takes one time and they forget it. It's really transformative, and it's transforming the way teachers teach so that they don't even have to teach the lessons anymore. The culture of their classroom has changed, because before, where they wouldn't think critically or let kids think for themselves, now they are. Where they didn't let kids, where kids may have attacked one another on the playground, there was a lot of violence post-ISIS. Now the kids are involved in resolution solving and finding solutions so that they're not fighting, and they're talking about Fruitopia. It's become, it's spreading. It's really exciting to see, and so it's changing the culture all around them. Some of the teachers have told me that as parents, they're working with their little girls differently, because they realize their girls have the freedom and rights to do things that they didn't want them to have or didn't think they could have. Not crazy things, but just they understand that they don't need to be afraid of their children interacting with somebody that might believe differently from them. So, Barbara.
I'm just puzzled that the government I still think of it as being dictatorial, would allow this.
So the question is, why is the government, which is still dictatorial, buying into this? And in many countries, that's the case. And even in parts of Iraq, that's the case. But there are some good officials at the grassroots level that we're working with that have seen the impact. And because they've seen the impact, they don't want to change. So just as an example, in Mosul, the head of the education department in Mosul, he's worked with us now for a few years. He's seen the impact. And I showed up last year to do this great PowerPoint showing him all the data, the interviews and the surveys that we'd taken. And he said, Tina, you don't need to show me any of that. I've seen it in person. I've seen what the change has been amongst the children, amongst the schools, amongst the teachers. So I believe it. You don't need to show me the data. I bought in. He lived under ISIS. He saw people hanging in the streets, being beheaded. He saw the inhumanity, and he doesn't want to go back to that. And like many other officials like him, they don't want to go backwards. So they're desperate for a solution that works. And there's been plenty of groups, UNESCO, IRI, like plenty of groups, international groups and American groups that have gone in, and we call them Beltway bandits because they take a lot of government funding and then they just go and they do a program and they leave. But they haven't changed anything. And these countries see it all the time. So when they see someone that didn't just go in and do a workshop and leave, but actually stayed with them and worked with them until there was a change that they could see it's different. And they want it because they don't just need their schools rebuilt. They don't want the schools to be destroyed again. And they know that that is what happens if they don't get at the root cause of the problem, of the way kids are thinking and those ideas of hate and intolerance that are being passed down from generation to generation. So unless you root that out, it's always going to recur. Conflict will come back. There will be another genocide. And they know that because the Yazidi community in particular has already had 72 genocides in their entire history. So when you're dealing with countries and communities that they've seen the recurrence, they've seen what happens, they don't trust the outside world because they know you come in, you save them, and then you leave, they're looking for something different. And that's the difference that Hardwired makes and that we have in these countries. We're not just there to fly in and then parachute out. We're really there for the long haul to see this transformation happen. And it takes a lot of work, and it takes finding those key government officials that can see the difference, that are inspired. And part of having the conference in Morocco was so that really top leaders in the world were able to inspire others to say, hey, this is working, do it. And that camaraderie is really important in this work as well. But the work has been recognized internationally, and people understand that there are very few solutions out there that are working, and that this one is, and because of that, we need to replicate it. So to the extent that we can, we will, and if you want to be a part of that and help this change occur in Iraq or in our own community here in Virginia, then I would love to talk with you about that afterwards. But thank you so much for your time and for being here and caring about this freedom.
I want us, you've already done the round of applause, and she will stay for some questions for not a whole long time, five minutes maybe, because she needs to get to DC and fly out, probably home. But I did want to announce next month's focus program is the third Tuesday of the month, May 21st. Donna Gallery, a lover of ancient Chinese culture and history, and she's going to talk about the Chinese custom of foot binding. So you can put it on your calendar, but it'll be in the Informer also. So thank you all for coming, and thank Tina for a wonderful presentation.
Ask Tina to explain the booklets and the books.
Okay.
So if you would like to purchase a book, there is information in the back about that. And Keaton has several copies here that you can purchase if you would like. We can mail you copies if you're not sure, if you want to get back to us. So there are copies here. There are copies that we can mail to you. The books are $15 each, or if you want to buy the whole set of 5 of them, then they're $50 for the whole five versions. And that includes Fruitopia, which is the story that we use around the world that that I designed, and that includes the Peaceful Garden story from Iraq as well, which I didn't share with you. So I'll leave you a teaser for that one back there. Thank you.
I want to